Welcome to the Dental School Guide podcast, your ultimate destination for all things dentistry. I'm Dr. Tanner Townsend, your guide through the complex world of dental education. Join us as we uncover the secrets of acing dental school admissions, navigating residency programs, and exploring career opportunities. Please share and enjoy. Real quick, just wanted to make all you pre-dental students out there aware of a resource. If you've ever been worried about getting into dental school or are wanting to get into that school of your dreams, then you definitely want to check out a program called Dental School Guide. In the program, we walk you through how to save money, time, and heartache when applying to dental school. There's so much fluff out there when it comes to resources for getting into school, and we are streamlining all of that. With our comprehensive digital course, expert mentorship, and personalized application review services, you'll have everything you need to stand out to admission committees. Take advantage of this amazing resource that will help you increase your chances of getting into dental school. You'll want to check out dentalschoolguide.com. Check it out. Welcome back to the Dental School Guide podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tanner Townsend, and today we have the Dean of Admissions at the University of Washington, Dr. Coldwell. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for Dr. Tanner for having me here.
You're welcome. Well, we are super excited to hear from you and just get to know you a little bit better and what University of Washington has to offer for future students. So at first, Dr. Coldwell, tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you end up at the University of Washington?
Yeah, well, I grew up on the East Coast. I went to college in North Carolina, and I went to graduate school in Pennsylvania. But I actually have generational ties to the University of Washington. My grandfather was a professor of sociology here. My parents actually met in chemistry class at the University of Washington, and my dad went on to get his PhD in physics here. So my blood definitely runs purple. I had an opportunity after I finished my PhD at Penn in 1994 to do some postdoctoral training at the University of Washington, and I leaped at the opportunity to come to Seattle.
Okay, so it sounds like you're a Husky through and through then.
Oh, yes.
You were bleeding purple. Well, I have to tell you this. I am from Oregon, and I am a Ducks fan, so I'm so sorry, but I think we'll get along just fine as we go along here. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about the University of Washington as the School of Dentistry. What are some of the unique things that sets the University of Washington apart from other dental schools?
Well, first of all, I have to praise the Pacific Northwest. And being from Oregon, I'm sure you know all about it. Pacific Northwest is fantastic. I really enjoy living in Seattle. It has all the amenities of a big city, but it's close to the mountains, lakes, and the ocean. So it has the best aspects of both worlds, big city restaurants and arts, and then the outdoors. So that's fantastic. The university itself, the University of Washington, we're an R1 university. So that means there's a huge amount of research going on here. And the faculty across campus are moving their fields forward. And that's very exciting. The dental school is no exception. The opportunities here to contribute to the cutting edge research are absolutely everywhere. So our school has a lot of opportunities for students to become involved in research, and they don't have to do it. It's not a requirement, but we have opportunities, formal ones, between the first and second years of dental school. And then in the fourth year, if a student is really engaged in research, they can spend a whole quarter doing research.
Wow. That's really cool. I'm going to interrupt you there if that's okay. And all along the way, I may do that. But
okay.
What are some of those topics that those students and faculty are researching at the school currently?
Well, it's fantastic. We have research going on in public health. So we have a lot of projects that go on up in Alaska, looking at Alaska Natives and diet. What can we do to help prevent caries? We also have research going on dental materials. We have research going on in Africa. There's just a huge range of projects from basic science to public health.
Very cool. Well, I'm sorry I interrupted you there. Continue on with what you were saying.
No problem. I also wanted to plug our DDS PhD track. So if there's anyone out there that's interested in becoming a dental academic, we have a route for you. It's 8 years. Not a lot of people pursue that, but it's an opportunity for those who are really engaged.
So that's cool. There's a couple different tracks that you can go down. In terms of the clinic life, what kind of, I know you guys, a lot of schools do externships and so on and so forth, where you kind of get outside of the school during your third and fourth year typically. What
Yeah.
are some of the externship experiences like for the students at the University of Washington?
Yeah, well, we have two different tracks within our program. So we have one, it's called the Regional Initiatives in Dental Education, or the RIDE track. Students in that track spend a lot of time in the community, particularly in rural and underserved communities, doing dentistry. So between their first and second year, they spend a month in a community health center doing what we call the Rural and Underserved Opportunities Program. Basically, they're dental assisting for a month in a community health center. In the fourth year, our RIDE students spend 5 months out on rotation. We try to send them
Wow.
back to the same place that they did between their first and second year, but now they have the dental skills to actually do some patient care. But sometimes it's a different community altogether. So that's our RIDE students. Everybody spends at least 6 months out on rotation. For our Seattle-based students, they also have some opportunities to do that month between first and second year. We usually have about 5 or 6 students do that as well. Some of them are in Montana, where we have some partnerships with clinics. And then in the fourth year, all of our Seattle-based students have the opportunity to spend 10 weeks out on rotation, 2 different 5-week rotations at community health centers.
Well, that's really cool. So they're out in the community a lot then. And it sounds like they're getting a lot of opportunities outside the school. I remember I went to Virginia Commonwealth University, and we had a great external rotationship experience, but I do wish it was more. So that's cool that they're able to be either 10 weeks or 5 months plus out on rotation. So that's awesome. In terms of like residency programs after school and postgraduate opportunities, whether it's private practice or so on, what do you guys do to help your students prepare for the residency programs or those postdoctoral or private practice opportunities?
Well, we have almost all the dental specialties represented here at the school. So in the third year, our students do what we call the clerkship rotations. For endodontics, oral surgery, and pediatric dentistry / orthodontics, they actually spend half of the time each quarter in that specialty clinic, learning how to do that care of that population. So they get a lot of exposure to endodontics, oral surgery, and pediatric dentistry, all in a concentrated form. For the other specialties, they also see patients under board certified specialists direction, but the patients they see are through a general practice model. So basically, if a student had a patient who had needs for a removable denture, for example, they would schedule that patient in a chair to be overseen by one of our faculty who's a prosthodontics. So there's expertise overseeing everything they do in the third year. That's where a lot of the exposure happens. Now that's good because most of our students are applying to specialty programs right at the end of their third year of dental school. So they've had good exposure to the specialist at that time. Students are also able to take advantage of some of our graduate programs as well. So for example, students interested in oral surgery usually attend the grand rounds for oral surgery residents. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. And then our students do form what we call registered student organizations. So for example, we have the PIG, Pediatric Interest Group. So there's a lot of exposure that students also get on their own. Bringing in the residents really helps though.
It's really neat. So in terms of those rotations that especially those third years go on, are they getting a lot of opportunities on those rotations to assist, or are they getting actually to perform those root canals or do those third molar extractions? How does that work for those third year students?
Yeah, those third year students are actually doing those procedures. So they're treating kids, they're doing endodontic procedures, and they're extracting teeth.
Well, that sounds like an excellent opportunity for those students.
Yeah.
In terms of requirements, I know every school has some different requirements as well in terms of graduating and things like that, especially once they get to those clinical years. What do those requirements? I know there's tons and tons, and we can go on and talk for a long time on what all those requirements are. But for some of the basic ones, like how many crowns you need to do, how many root canals or how many teeth you need to take out? What are some of those basic requirements that University of Washington requires for graduation?
Yeah, we have a certain number of requirements in order to take competency exams. So we go with a competency model. So we do want students to have enough experience with procedures in order to attempt a competency model, but we don't strictly have a number of procedures per se that they have to do to graduate. And we look at those every year in terms of how many procedures should a student do to be competent enough to take a competency exam. So it varies year to year. I can't say exactly how many of each for each year.
That's totally fair. And so for those of you listeners that don't know what a competency is, it's basically just an exam. So in dental school, competency is a very common word that is used to just kind of evaluate your progress and have a faculty member kind of test you along the way. So that's what we mean by competency. It's an exam to kind of test your skill and your learning that you've achieved so far. So that's excellent. In terms of every school has things that they can improve upon along the road and that they're working on to make better for future classes of students. What are some things that the University of Washington is doing to hopefully improve for the future classes that are coming down the pipe?
Yeah, I think we have a strong reputation in teaching the clinical fundamentals. But, we feel like we could make some progress in terms of digital dentistry. So that's our big initiative at the moment. We've done a lot of fundraising around that, and we're getting ready to remodel our simulation lab to really implement some of the newer aspects of digital dentistry. So we're really hoping to get further along in some of this modernization. That's where we're going.
That is really cool. So in terms of the modernization that you're alluding to in the sim lab, if you can share, what are some of the things that you guys are trying to do to that sim lab to increase that technology and things like that?
Yeah, so having a design room where students can go in and design their projects, and really getting the digital workflow going fully, so that we're moving from that old plaster model to actually taking impressions digitally and making the projects digitally as well.
Wow, that's really cool. So I'm assuming that you'll probably be implementing those for first and second year students a lot in the sim lab. And that way, when they get to clinic, they're comfortable with the digital workflow. They're comfortable with being able to scan a crown or scan a denture, so on and so forth.
Exactly.
That is great. All right. Well, that is kind of some of the questions that we had about the school itself. But let's talk a little bit about what the admissions process is like at the University of Washington. And we're going to kind of start really broad, and then we'll kind of narrow down to specifics of like, okay, what is this aspect specifically like at your guys' school? But just to kind of give us a broad initial overview, what is the admissions process look like at the University of Washington from when you guys get that first application for the student to when you invite them for an interview?
Yeah, well, like all schools, or pretty much all schools in the country, we use the American Dental Education Association's ADSAS application. I think that stands for something like Associated American Dental Schools Application Service. So it's kind of like the Common App for applying to college. A lot of schools will have another questionnaire that they send you after getting that first application through the Common App system. But we have all of our secondary questions on that application through ADIA ADSAS. So unless you're applying for the RIDE program, we have an additional question or two for the RIDE applicants. But if you're just applying for a Seattle-based program, you can expect all the questions to be on that first application. There won't be additional questions that you have to fill out. We go through a process of selecting applicants to interview. And basically what we use for that is what state are you a resident of? So we have a preference for Washington State residents, and we also prefer residents of the WICHE states. So that's Arizona, New Mexico, Montana, Alaska, Hawaii, North Dakota, and Wyoming. So those are states that well, except for Arizona, don't have dental schools. And so they're spending some extra money to send their residents to schools in other states. And we have a contract for that. So we do have a preference for WICHE state applicants in our admission system as well.
I've got a couple questions, if that's okay. Out
Sure.
of those things you said some really great things there. So in those WICHE state students that are applying to the University of Washington, when they apply, do they get kind of grandfathered in for in-state tuition, or how does that work for those students that are applying from those states?
Yeah, great question. So the WICHE contract means that for most of those states, and Alaska's different, so we can talk about Alaska separately, but for most of those states, the state is paying a support fee to the University of Washington. That's almost equivalent to the difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition. So WICHE students from WICHE states still pay out-of-state tuition during our summer quarters, but for fall, winter, and spring, the student is responsible for the in-state portion, and the WICHE support fee is paying the difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition. Alaska's a little different. Their state offers a loan. And so students from Alaska are paying the full out-of-state tuition.
Well, that's really interesting that those states supplement that, and that's great that they provide that opportunity since they don't have dental schools in their state. So you had also mentioned previously, kind of in the beginning, that we have the Seattle-based program and then the RIDE program. If you could go in a little bit more depth, what's the difference between the two? You had mentioned that there's a few more questions on the students that are applying for the RIDE program. Like, how many students do you accept for the Seattle program versus the RIDE program, and so on?
Yeah, great question. So the RIDE program was just expanded to 16 students. So this admission cycle will be taking 16 students into that program. In the past, since its inception in 2008, we had just eight students. The focus of the program is on rural and underserved areas of our state. So there's lots of dentists here on the very west coast of the state, up and down our Interstate 5 corridor, but not so many dentists in the central and eastern parts of the state. So the program is really designed to get dentists into these rural areas where they're very much needed. So the way the RIDE program works is the students spend the first 2 years of the program in the eastern part of the state, based out of Spokane, so almost on the border with Idaho. They take their classes remote, but it's not like the Zoom world we've been living in during the pandemic. So they're actually in a classroom all together in Spokane. So it has been 8, now it'll be 16 students. They have their own faculty member in the classroom who has expertise. And so the lectures are usually coming from Seattle, but any of the small group interactions, questions that you have, office hours, those are all happening with the faculty member who's in Spokane. And sometimes that Spokane faculty is actually the expert, and the lectures go the other way to Seattle. So it's not necessarily all distance learning. And then there's a dental lab in Spokane as well. So the students are doing their projects together in the lab in Spokane. I think I mentioned that they'll do a rotation to a community health center between their first and second year. The RIDE students spend their third year in Spokane doing those clerkships with specialists here in Seattle. So they'll move to Seattle for the third year, and then in the fourth year, they'll spend 5 months at a community health center. So that's the major difference. They're all everybody's considered part of the same class. They're all admitted with the same standards. It's just that some students are chosen to go to Spokane, and some students elect to stay in Seattle.
That was kind of going into my next question with that RIDE program. Is it preferential students that want to stay in rural communities kind of get that tract, or how do you guys decide who gets that tract and so on?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mentioned that we have another question or two for those that are interested in the RIDE program, and that is about how they fit with the mission of the program, which is really to get dentists into rural and underserved areas. So we have some questions aimed at finding out that that's your career goal. And the students, once they've been admitted to the University of Washington, a smaller group of our admissions committee that with RIDE expertise meets, and makes a selection based on that other essay question and the additional questions of who will be offered the RIDE program opportunity. As you can imagine, if your dental school class size is only 16, that's pretty appealing. And I have a nice modern facility over there in Spokane that they're using. And so there's a lot of perks to being in that program, a lot of interest in it. And so, but we're really aiming to get students back into those areas in Washington where there's needs. So that's a preference for the.
It's an excellent initiative you guys have to get people in those rural communities. But it sounds like the RIDE program is great along with the Seattle-based program. So that is very cool, kind of unique aspect that you guys have with your school. So that kind of touches a little bit on the RIDE program and just the application as a whole. But let's talk a little bit about what qualities and attributes are you guys looking for when you get a new applicant? What are you guys looking for? You're like, that's someone that's going to fit in the University of Washington. What are some things that you guys specifically are like, this fits our culture, this fits our school?
Yeah. Well, I think you can tell that community is a big factor for us. So community service is a huge thing that we look for in the school. We want people that are out in communities, are interested in giving back to communities. They're in dentistry for the right reasons, to help others. So that's a huge factor. We want people that have explored the profession. They know why they want to be a dentist. And so that's also another important factor. But beyond that, there's a lot of different ways that students can fit at the university. So obviously we have a big focus on research, but not everyone has to do research. So if you've done it and you're excited about it, that could make you a great fit, but it's not necessarily a requirement. We also have this focus on rural. And so if that's something that you want to do, and that would make you a good fit too, but in a different way. We also have a clinic for persons with disabilities. So we have what we call dental education for the care of persons with disabilities. So we have some people that are really interested in special care dentistry. That's another great fit. So really lots of different ways that a student could show that they fit here. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
So that special care dentistry, that's kind of a unique aspect to dental schools. Not all dental schools have it. There are a few in the country that kind of do. Is that kind of going back to the aspects of the school a little bit, but is that a rotation that students go on, or is that like a subspecialty almost like a specialty that students can rotate through? How does that work?
All of the above. So,
Okay.
so every student in third and fourth year is going to rotate through that clinic. So our goal is that when you graduate, you will be comfortable treating a patient in a wheelchair, a patient with autism, a patient that has different disabilities. We want you to be comfortable doing that. So all students will rotate through those clinics and learn how to deliver that kind of care. But we have students that get really excited about it too. So we have elective opportunities in the fourth year to spend more time in that clinic. And then out of our general practice residency program, so that's a residency program that students can do after dental school. It's normally a one-year program, but some people decide to stay a second year of GPR and do a fellowship opportunity in our clinic in our Decode clinic. So that's another opportunity as well. We currently have 2 alumni who are back teaching in that clinic now too. So it does generate a lot of excitement.
It's kind of a unique aspect, and being able to care for those people. During my residency program, it was always a challenge when you had someone that came in a wheelchair or had a disability, and it really made you think outside the box. But I'm so grateful I had that experience, because then you know what to do in that situation when you get into private practice. So that's great. Now take us inside the admissions room. Let's say we've got all the applicants, or a ton of applicants that have applied to your guys' school. Interviews haven't been sent out. Walk us through exactly what goes on. Do you guys meet with a team that reads all the applications? What does that look like?
Well, for determining who gets an interview, what we do is we do an opt-in approach rather than a cutout approach. So actually, that decision is largely made on where you live and the academic aspects. But for the academics, there are lots of ways that you can demonstrate that you can make it through dental school. I mean, that's really the question. Are you going to succeed in the dental school curriculum for the basic science part? So we look at the basic science GPA, and we want to see that that's looking pretty solid. If it isn't, then we'll turn to looking to the DAT. So maybe you had a rough first year, maybe it's been hard to get your GPA up as you continue through college, but you've figured it out and you just nailed the DAT, the dental admissions test. So if your DAT score shows you can do it, then we'll consider you for an interview. If none of those work, if your GPA isn't very good, standardized tests aren't your thing, then a post-bac program can be a good way to demonstrate that you can make it through a tough science curriculum. So we're really looking for a student to opt in one of those 3 routes to showing they can make it academically. Beyond that, it's where you live. So residency is a real important factor in determining that you get an interview. So basically academics and residency for the interview. And then we move into the whole file approach to admission.
Well, we'll have to get into that file approach in a moment. I think that's a great route to go. But the opt-in thing, so it's not an elimination thing at your school. That's very interesting. In terms of opting in, so it's just like, okay, these ones are hitting more of the criteria. These are the ones that are probably right behind that group that hits the criteria. Is that kind of how it works then?
We actually run lists. So you opt into a list when you meet one of the criteria. And It can be any one of those 3 criteria. Basically just have to demonstrate academic readiness any one way. None is better than the other. Because there's a lot of different ways that people study and perform, and we want to give as many opportunities as possible for you to demonstrate that you can make it academic.
So in terms of a post-bac, I think the post-bac is a tricky situation for a lot of students. Let's say they didn't do as great as they would want on the DAT and an undergrad. So they're deciding to do either a post-bac or a master's program. There's a lot of students that apply, and when they're applying for dental school, they're still in the beginning of their post-bac program or 1-year master's program. How is that viewed by you all? I know they can constantly update their application, but it's also like, okay, you can only update it so much before you guys start doing interviews and admissions and things like that.
Right. That's a conversation we have all the time on our committee, as you can imagine. So we like to see at least a quarter or a semester of post-bac performance. And we want to see that under a load. So post-bacs differ quite a bit.
They do.
Yeah. So sometimes people are just taking individual courses at a community college, one by one. Sometimes they're in a master's program, but it's more of a public health focus. We like to see that you have many science courses, so 3 or 4 ideally, taken at the same time, and that you're doing well in those. And you need to have at least a quarter or 2 of demonstration that you're doing well in those, because it simulates what the first year of dental school is going to be like. We want to know that you can be successful there, because you can't be a dentist if you can't get through the first year.
And so some schools prefer master's programs over post-bacs. Do you guys care which one it is? I've had a couple deans mention that, hey, we really like a 2-year master's program because that shows over the long haul that you've made the change, that you can really grow. Do you guys have a preference, or just, if they've done a quarter, like you said, we're good with the quarter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, more than 1 quarter's demonstration is better than just 1 quarter's. Yeah,
exactly.
But there's this trade-off. There's this expense of time, and there's the expense of the programs as well. So many of these programs cost as much as a year of dental school.
They do. They're pricey.
They're very expensive, and we recognize that. So there's different ways to get it done. But basically what we're trying to see is that when you're taking a heavy load of courses all at the same time, you're able to perform well. And that's what the committee is going to be evaluating.
That's great. I think that makes total sense. So in terms of the ranking system, you guys it doesn't sound like you are ranking off of personal statement or anything like that till we get to the interview portion. I'm assuming once they've kind of gotten past that initial residency or academic performance, that's when you kind of go more into the meat of the application. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So walk us through, as we're moving from those students that have opted in and they've met that criteria, what happens next?
Yeah, so you're invited to an interview, and we've changed that up a lot. We can talk about interviews later, I suppose. Right now, what we're using is the Kira platform. So we have an asynchronous interview, a video-based interview. So you're invited for that. We have a different group that scores that interview, then looks at the rest of your application. And that's meant to reduce some bias there. And for your whole application, we have 2 members of our admissions committee who are assigned to review each application independently. They're the ones reading all the personal statements, looking at your transcript in detail, reading through your letters of recommendation. And they'll each independently score that application. For the interview, we've typically had 7 different raters. So pre-COVID, we used a multiple mini interview system. And so you interviewed with 7 different people and they each rated you. With our Kira asynchronous interview, we have 7 different questions and 7 different faculty who rate each of those questions. So there's really a lot of people looking at each applicant. Those scores are combined together into what I like to call an admissions priority score. It doesn't determine if you're in or not. It's just the order that we talk about you in front of the whole committee. So based on that priority score, those applications are discussed before our entire admissions committee of 15 people. The 2 primary members who read through the whole application will verbally present the applicant to the whole committee, describing strengths and weaknesses and what they liked about the application. And then the whole committee will vote on admission of the applicant after that presentation.
So I'm assuming it's a majority vote that you got 15, you got to get 8 to get that student in for that seat.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Well, that sounds like a very, very structured approach. And I really like that, how it's structured. We got a couple people grading this portion, other people grading this portion, and we can vote. That's very cool. So in terms of that Kira assessment, let's move into the interview topic a little bit. Interviews are constantly changing, and a lot more schools are moving to this Kira assessment program. Have you guys seen a difference in the applicants and the ability to discern how strong an applicant is based on that, as opposed to the mini interview model?
Well, we structured our Kira interview to be as close as we could virtually to the multiple mini interview. You know, we've tried to make it similar.
Yeah.
But it is different. In the multiple mini interview, you're able to form much more of a connection, of course, because you're interviewing with a real person. I think it's also less stressful and more personal for the applicant.
Yeah.
They're very stressed when they first come in for that multiple mini interview on the weekend. They don't know what to expect. There's nothing you can do to prepare for it. But by the end, I think they realize this is really fair. And, you know, not everybody, but most applicants end up having fun. We have our students in there kind of helping them be relaxed. They're going in and they realize I get to restart each time when I go in the room with another interviewer. Those aspects aren't appearing in the Kira. So, you know, I think it's harder when you're in a room by yourself videoing a response to know how it went. There's no facial expressions, no ability to make a connection. You know, so the feedback we're getting is not as positive as that in-person approach. And so we're considering going back. On the other hand, the reason a lot of us have stuck with these virtual interviews is it makes it a lot easier for applicants, particularly those from out of state, to interview and participate. And it really brings the cost down for applicants in terms of traveling around to different schools. So right now we're weighing those pluses and minuses and trying to figure out what we're going to do this next cycle.
Sounds like it might be kind of in flux, but for example, if a student wanted to come and check out the school and to meet with you and to kind of see what the student life would be like, is that an acceptable thing to reach out to you for? Or is that like a, hey, let's not do that right now kind of thing?
Oh, no, as part of the interview, as part of our application process, we have information sessions. Okay. So we schedule those. This year, what we did is we had one in-person information session where you could come and do a tour of the school, meet with some of our students on that tour, hear from our deans and faculty about what's going on. And then we had one virtual for people who couldn't travel. So you had that. And then we have something we call Second Look. And those for people getting offers on December 15th, the first day that we're allowed to give offers. We're invited to come to our school in January and do that same thing. So really see the school, talk to students, and of course now the decision's in your hands instead of ours. And so it's a little bit of a different interaction, but definitely an opportunity to walk the hallways here.
Very cool. So in terms of that December 15th day, there's a lot of students that are admitted on that day, but there still are seats that you're probably going to have to fill in the coming months. How do you guys go about doing that? Do you continue interviews going into the new year? Or is it, hey, we're picking from our wait list at this point and we've got our ranking system that we have ranked these students like this is a top priority student. They didn't make the cut for the first one, but they're right at the top of the wait list. How do you determine, hey, we're taking this more new interview over the wait list?
Yeah, we've stopped interviewing in December and beyond. The energy level is just so different.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So the multiple mini interview and the Kira system has allowed us to interview much more efficiently than we used to back in the day when everybody would come in sort of one at a time. And that's allowed us to get all our interviews done by the end of November. So that means that we can get all the interviews done, but that doesn't mean we've finished reviewing all the applications. So we're still reading applications into January usually. We only make 63 offers. So that's the number I guess we're going up by 8. So we'll be making a few more offers on December 15th. And I always tell students, I can guarantee you 2 things. One, nobody will tell me on December 16th that they don't want to come here. But 2, I don't know how many, I won't hear back, probably for another month.
Yeah.
So, basically what happens, because we're required to give 30 days for everybody to make a decision, basically what happens is offers go out in waves of 30 days. So we make the initial batch of only the number of positions that we have on December 15th, and then we'll make another wave of offers probably around January 15th, and then February 15th, and so on. We're usually done by March in terms of people end up on a wait list or rejected by March. We don't put everybody on the wait list. We only put applicants on a wait list if we realistically think there's a chance they could make it into the class.
Okay, I think a lot of schools have a different approach to that wait list where some will be like, yeah, we're going to throw everyone we interviewed on there, or we're going to just pick the ones we think have a realistic chance. So that's very cool that you guys do that. In terms of once they're accepted, what does that process look like for them getting onboarded in terms of things they need to get done before they come to school in terms of financial aid and so on? There's a lot of different little things that students will need to get their ducks in a row on.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things we worry about is the prerequisites. So we have a lot of prerequisites that other programs don't have. So we actually require 2 quarters of microbiology. That's probably our biggest barrier for many students, and 2 quarters of biochemistry. Usually students haven't finished those by the time they're applying to dental school. Those are usually courses they're taking in their senior year. So the very first thing you have to do is finish those courses. And send us transcripts that document that you've finished those courses. It's usually not in your ADSAS application. We have a system for managing immunizations, so you'll have to be compliant with a large number of immunizations to come to dental school. That keeps you safe and the patient safe. So students will need to go through the documentation of the immunizations next. And we will actually register you for classes, so you don't have to worry about that. Financial aid, everybody's running a little bit late this year because of the federal changes to the financial aid form, but that comes kind of in late spring. And we start in the middle of July. So it's a quick turnaround from undergrad if you're finishing that up to starting dental school in July.
So if you're an undergrad student that's going into dental school, make sure you're getting all those prerequisite courses done. And that goes for every school, because you got to have those done before you matriculate. So that is excellent. In terms of letters of intent, let's go back a little bit. And I missed this because I wanted to ask you this. Deans have different feelings about the letter of intent. And this seems to be kind of a newer thing in the recent years, where students will send a letter of intent in hopes, I feel like it's in hopes of, hey, I'm trying to show my interest in this school.
Yeah.
How do you guys evaluate letters of intents at your school?
Yeah, I do wonder who's advising students to write those. They don't have much of an influence on us at all, and it looks like students spend a lot of effort putting those together. They're really detailed and long. I do put them in the files, so occasionally the application hasn't come up for discussion before the committee yet, and that letter will be there. So it might help in that regards a little bit. It's not a big factor ever. And if you're on the wait list, the committee's already made a decision, so it won't help you at all if you're on the wait list. It's not going to help, yeah. It's just going in your file.
That's kind of what I've gathered from talking to other schools as well, is it's kind of just this extra thing. And you see students spend so much time and effort on these things, and it's like, I don't know if it really is making that big of a difference for you. So that's good to know. How much, in regards to essays and things like that, how much does that personal statement weigh in when you have your 2 graders reading through the personal statement? How much of a factor does that have along with the letters of recommendation?
Yeah, those are really important. So it's good that, and that's where you should spend your effort, really, is in that essay. The committee member that's reading the application is really trying to figure out who are you, and all of the things in the application should come together to tell the same story. It should all fit. If it doesn't, the committee members left to try to fill in gaps and figure it out, and they're getting frustrated. So the letters you have very little control over. Hopefully they should match what you say in your application.
Yeah.
But the essays and the other essay questions that we ask on the application should all come together to tell a story about who are you, what excites you about dentistry, what's been your experience so far, and what are you bringing to the school? What are you going to contribute to the field and the school to really make an impact? And it should all jive.
It should all fit together. Like the COVID letter should be fit in with the personal statement and so on. Yeah,
exactly. And if there are gaps or things that don't make sense, I recommend finding somewhere in the application to bring it together for the committee member so that they're not trying to figure that out. A big thing we have here in Washington State is a program called Running Start. It's basically a dual enrollment program. So we have a lot of students that are applying. They did their first 2 years in high school.
Oh, wow.
That's what Running Start is. Yeah, you spend your first 2 years in community college while you're in high school. And so they're applying earlier. So they're finishing their undergraduate basically in 2 years. And you can't see that on the application. So what we see is you see a community college transcript, and then you see a college transcript. And the student looks like they started at community college and they transferred to a 4-year college. It's not obvious that they were in high school for the first 2 years. So one of the pieces of advice I give to students is, if you tripped up during those 2 years of community college because you were just a high school student, it might be good to bring that up.
Yeah. That is a very good point, because you guys don't know that. I can totally see how that would be really confusing on your guys' end to know.
Yeah, unless somebody looks at the graduation date from high school and then kind of does the math, it doesn't come through that it's not a typical transfer student.
It's very interesting. Okay, so kind of that kind of sparks another question. There are some schools, dental schools out there, that do kind of like an early enrollment, or not an early enrollment, but like a D.5 program. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before, where the student maybe was on the wait list or really close to filling one of those seats, but you're going to kind of test them out in that first year with a couple classes to see if they can handle the load. Does University of Washington do something similar to that, or?
No, we don't. We had a program like that years ago, and it had a bit of a bad reputation. So that's not something that continued at the University of Washington.
Very fair.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's okay. Well, let's kind of finish up this interview with a little bit of advice from you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hit you. We're going to hit you with some rapid fire questions here, and
Okay.
just give us your quick advice on what you would do if you were a student applying.
Mm-hmm.
So for applicants that are preparing for interviews and other components of the admissions process, what is your top piece of advice that you would give to those students?
Okay. Be yourself, and don't be over rehearsed. I think the biggest mistake that I see for applicants when they're interviewing is just going into a script. Instead of talking, instead of listening to what the question is sometimes they're off answering another question because I rehearsed this so well. You want to be comfortable, you want to be yourself and show that interviewer who you genuinely are.
That you just showing that you're yourself. So that is great. What advice would you give someone that has multiple schools that they can pick from, like they're accepted to multiple schools on December 15th? How should they go about picking what school that they should go to?
Well, if you can, make sure you do visit the school. So even if you had a virtual interview, if there's an opportunity to go visit the school in person, take that opportunity when you have those multiple visits. And try to interact with the students that are there. Find out what that community of students is like and talk to them about what being in the program is like. They'll be real with you as to what's happening in the program and what the community is like. And that's really important, who your peers are and what the kind of student community there is at a program.
Great. What advice do you have for students that are rejected from your school or any other school? How should they go about preparing for the next cycle?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a lot of students get in on the second and third application. So don't be taken aback by that. It's very common and there's often success. We like to see grit and resilience, and coming back to do it again is part of that grit and resilience. We also like to see self-reflection. So look at your application. What do you think the weaknesses are? You're probably in the best position to evaluate that. Some of us will give you some feedback on the applications, other programs won't. I usually tell people, and it's true, if you got an interview, there's nothing dramatically wrong with your application.
Mm-hmm.
But I can usually provide a little bit of insight into what some of the notes the committee members left for me, maybe some areas of improvement. Sometimes it's obvious. Your DAT or your GPA could be improved. And sometimes people are surprised how important volunteering and shadowing are. So those areas are even easier to improve. But basically coming back and learning from the experience and doing it again is part of the process.
In terms of the community service and the shadowing, what advice do you have for students that are doing both of those in terms of getting more? What are you guys looking for in terms of those aspects?
Yeah, I mean, it somewhat comes down to hours. For shadowing, for community service, we're looking for a passion and commitment. It's not necessarily dentistry that's community service, but if you have kind of a thread of things that you're interested in, that's great. And a long-term track record with that, that's great. So if you're someone who is often doing things with youth groups, that's clearly your passion. That's wonderful to see. It doesn't necessarily need to be dentistry. For dentistry, we do want to see that you've been exploring this for a while, that you didn't just do shadowing right before you submitted your application, that there's a theme that's running through. And I usually advise people, if you've only shadowed with specialists, you might want to consider adding some general dentistry to that.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing. We've cut down those hours quite a bit that we expect during COVID. People were having a hard time getting into dental offices. But most people coming in have at least 100 hours of shadowing. So that's a good target to aim for.
Well, any final pieces of advice that you'd like to kind of pass on to those students that will be applying in the future?
Just this is a fantastic profession. I'm not a dentist myself, but I've now been here at the University of Washington for 30 years. We've seen a lot of alumni come back really excited and passionate about what they do. And if you enjoy helping people and getting a skill that will help you help others, really consider this. It's a fantastic career.
Well, thank you, Dr. Coldwell. You provided some excellent insights, and we really enjoyed having you on the podcast today. So that is it for today's episode of the Dental School Guide podcast. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today's episode of the Dental School Guide podcast. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspiration to fuel your journey into dentistry. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more expert advice, inside tips, and engaging discussions. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. It would mean the world to us. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and remember, your dental dreams are closer than you think. Thanks for tuning in to the Dental School Guide podcast.